Hey, this is Kenneth, and you are listening to Who Asked Us? Deep thoughts, lighthearted conversations. Join us as we discuss our way through the Bible with a growing, rotating panel of guests, none of which claim to be experts on any of this. We hope you get just as much out of these conversations as we did having them. Thanks for listening.
We're not doing video. But
No.
cool. So you guys wanna dive in?
What?
Would you like to dive in?
Yeah, we could dive.
Would you like to make a leap of faith?
Oh, God.
Yeah, I would. That sounds swell.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
So Genesis, man.
Genesis.
Where do you
Now
Dang.
we're starting.
I know.
Oh, man. Well, before we dive in, I think what's cool is that this episode merges well into the next episode.
I think so.
Like,
There's a good setup into the
Mhm.
next episode.
I wonder who did that.
Spoiler
That's-
alert, but
that's,
okay.
Pretty cool. Doesn't she
Spoiler
already
alert.
have the notes for the next episode?
No, for our listeners,
like,
not for
for-
me.
Oh,
I know what's
yeah.
happening.
Well, you don't have to start from here. We can start from right
Yeah,
after
we
we do the
could
clap.
start
Don't we have to do the clap?
here.
Oh no, I'm including this. They're gonna get the spoiler.
Oh.
We're gonna go from Genesis and continue through the Bible. Everybody, that's a spoiler. Isn't that
I
crazy?
mean,
What a
the
surprise!
Bible's been around for so long.
Newsflash, the
They
world
should-
actually
they should have known
starts.
by now.
It's like, oh, God.
But
mhm.
no, I was just gonna say, like,
Either way.
it's it's interesting. I've heard this so many times. I mean, in the Catholic Church, we go through like all this stuff in like at the Easter Vigil Mass,
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
and so you hear even reading through it, I was like, yeah, I've heard this, and I was like, all right, let me slow down. Like, what does all this mean? You know what I mean? So like, any like surface reactions, or was it similar to me where you guys are like, I've read this before, like
Mhm.
he created the world, and you have what we talked about last episode, which was is it poetry or is it not? But like anything a little further than that is we're like actually in the text.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think just reading through this again for like the God knows how many times, it's always like I can't not see this poetry because it's very different from the rest of like the entire Bible,
Mhm.
where it's like,
Mhm.
the more and more I read it, it's the more and more poetic it becomes, and also real, if that makes any sense. I don't know. So I start
Yeah, I
finding
agree.
things in it, and I'm like, this is an interesting way of writing and a way of thinking. It's very poetic, and it's very I don't want to use the word magical because that's going to have a very bad but it's magical in the sense that like you're watching a very, very good Disney movie or like one of like Spirited Away type of movies, right? Like it's imaginative. I think that's the term I'm coming to. It's a very imaginative thing. Just the way in which it speaks about how the world's created. It's not really like a story, honestly. At least not the first 7, the first like the days of creation thing. It's not a story at all. It's just it's like a prelude. It's pretty cool. Like, it's the beginning of a storybook. It's just like in the beginning. It's like, gives you
Yeah.
chills.
I like actually read through this pretty recently because I was trying to study up on something else. Like I was looking into the names of God in the Bible, and so I was reading this like I want to say like a week ago. So rereading it in this context was a little like, okay, I need to like turn off that part of my brain and reread it. But something like that you said, Kenneth, that like stuck out to me was that like I think imagining this as you're reading it like really like brings the words to life. Like I'm a very visual person. Like when I read books or whatever, like I like play it out in my brain. I'm just not looking at the words. And just like imagining God, like imagining nothing and then imagining chaos and imagining like God like speaking the world into creation like is like kind of wild. And so every time I read through this like the first 7 days, I'm just like, wow, like there was like nothing that existed. Like if we're taking this, not saying that this is we could get into that maybe later if this is like word for word truth, or again, if this is a story or this is like an allegory or whatever it is. But if we're taking it as like cinematography that we're watching, like it's kind of crazy to think about everything in existence coming into existence purely through spoken word, and
Mhm.
like how amazing God is in that sense and how big he is in that sense. So
Mm.
yeah, that's what always like sticks out to me when I'm reading through this chapter.
Yeah.
I have so many questions based on what you just said.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, like so Nat, like, so first of all, before I get into any of that, you were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I was looking into the names of God." What do you mean? And I know it's kind of a separate. What do you mean, and what made you go? Because I'm not like I've seen you like your pictures of your Bible, and it's like different color highlighters, you know, for different times you've gone
So
through.
studious.
It's so studious.
We-
What a student, lifelong learner.
We talked
over here.
about this before. Yeah.
But like, what made you go like, I need to look into the different? Like, I assume you mean like the different names of God in like the original language, so to
Yes,
speak,
yeah.
or the different languages as it's been translated. Like, what's that all
Exactly.
about?
Exactly. Yeah, no. So culturally, like Indian people culturally, and most like sometimes Christians do this, if you grew up like with this practice, is like depending on what you're praying for or like the situation that you're in, you kind of like evoke a specific name of God. So like there are different names of God throughout the Bible. Like there's Jehovah Jireh, your provider, there's El Roy, which translates to like the God who sees me. There's Elohim, there's Yahweh, there's like so many different names.
But it's
And
still
to
the
be-
same entity that we're
It's the
referring
same,
to.
yeah, it's the same
Huh.
entity. And so the power behind those names like is that when you say those names, you're kind of thinking back to the story through which that name was revealed, and like you're like appealing to that specific aspect of God's character. And to be honest, I don't know a lot of the names. And so like I'll be praying, not me, but like my uncle is a pastor. He'll come over and he'll start praying and he'll like whip out all of these names, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like
Yeah.
I have no clue what you're talking about.
But that makes
And
sense because you're bringing. Sorry to interrupt, but like,
No, go ahead.
Because when you say it like that, because of his understanding of like the definition of that name of God,
Exactly.
so much more like it's like I could either say a word or I could say the definition of the word in place of that word. Like it's just a much more efficient way to be specific in your prayer. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
That's cool.
That's exactly what it is. And then I also, there's like a song that's been like everywhere recently where it's a Christian song, and she literally just belts out all of the names, like 10 names of God in the song. And if you hear it, it really evokes a lot of like my spirit, and like I feel like it's a very powerful song. But I was just like, I don't even know what you're actually saying.
Yeah.
And so it really got me to be like, I want to agree, like I want to sing along with my pastor's prayer. I want to like be there with you as you're praying these words, but I don't understand it. So I wanted to put the groundwork in and kind of like understand it. And so in Genesis, a lot of the time when God's being mentioned, the actual root is Elohim, which is just in that, like in Hebrew, I think, right? It's in Hebrew.
Yeah, I think it's Hebrew.
I think it's Hebrew. But in Hebrew, Elohim is just the word for God, and so the word
that's just like
yeah. I think that's
God,
just tying that
which
in.
Which is wild.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think, and there's like a bigger thing going on here. Like, it's important because in this first, chapter and a little bit after, you're introduced to just Elohim, which is not even, it's important to note, like, it's not even just the word for God. It's not even specified, right? Because Elohim is a word that can be used to mention any type of
God
thing that is not, like any type of spirit or anything like that. Like,
okay.
That's why you would see something in, like later on, you'd say like he's the Most High God or something like that. Which is in their language, it's like the Elohim of Elohim. When you put like two words together,
it
means like
So, but that's cool because it's like an introduction.
Yeah, exactly. Like so, at this point in the story, you don't even know who God is. You're just hearing in the story that there's some spiritual thing, some entity, something.
Which, if you think about,
everything.
I don't mean to keep interrupting, but it's like I just want to like add these little tags. But like, if you think about it, how it's like if you read this book from beginning to end as somebody who think of how normal people read books. They pick up a book, they go, I don't know what's happening in here.
Yeah.
I'm going to read it. Most people who pick up the Bible probably either believe or know what's kind of in there, and they're looking for
Mhm.
answers and stuff.
Mhm.
So who reads this and their first introduction to this God is here in this way? But
Mhm.
I would argue in this day and age, probably no one.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
that's, I think we'll keep coming back to like the idea of like the intended audience
You know?
kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I think that's really cool because he describes it as like, hey, there's this God,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's gonna go into, but look what this one can do. You know what I mean? And,
Exactly.
like, this
It's,
is
like,
like you said,
very
the Elohim of
different.
Elohims, and eventually it turns into like with all these different names.
Mhm.
That sounds like it's the human mind categorizing.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
You know what I mean? All these this infinite God,
Based on
because we
how they
can't.
Yeah.
interact with him. Yeah.
Well, there's so much things that we like. You said before, like Natasha, you had said like in the beginning, like, you know, like there was nothing, and what popped in my head was, I wonder what she thinks of when she thinks of nothing, and it's probably
Yeah.
darkness, but
Mhm.
that's not nothing, that's something.
Mhm.
Something. Yeah.
So that's why there's so many literally unfathomable
Of
things
course.
for us. So it's cool to see like how it's set up for us to interact with in
And
little
go
bits.
through. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I want us to state on the Genesis
Mhm.
stuff, but I will make another point too. From a narrative story point of view, we don't get to even know what this Elohim, this God is, until he says his name like much later in like Exodus.
Yeah.
Right? When Moses is at the burning bush and he's like, well, what should
Mhm.
I say your name is? And God finally says his actual name, right?
Name. Yeah.
So it's just like we're starting off this story, and I'm kind of going back to what you just said. We're starting off this story, and there's nothing but God and basically darkness, which is not
Mhm.
nothing, but it's just not.
But is it
order.
darkness? Like, isn't there a point
Well,
where
It's
like it says
It's like the
without
mist is
form-
over the waters, right?
It's
I think
let me hold on. Let me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
you could do better than that. Come on,
I probably could, but I'm a little stuffy.
I love
The
it.
earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep.
Oh, okay.
And
so
the
it was
Spirit
dark.
of God was hovering over the face
Over the
of the
waters.
waters.
Sorry, guys. I have one more thing to say because low-key I'm a nerd about this and I can like talk about this forever and we should probably get to the topic. But one thing that Kenneth said that I wanted to talk about is the intended audience. And like I think context, like sometimes you read this and you just read it to read it. And sometimes I think if you want to hone in a little bit deeper, you put things into context. And so for this book, right, like who's writing it? Moses is writing it, and he's writing it in Exodus, which we'll get to eventually.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And he's writing it like prior to this, all of these stories are like auditory stories that are passed down through generations, right?
Mm.
And he's just putting this pen to paper. So that's one thing. Second thing is that like Kenneth was talking about with yeah. Anyway, second thing, the other thing to consider is like the cultures that God's people are around. So like Christianity in this early form, is not the only religion that exists, which is also really important to the context of the story.
Mhm.
Because Moses is speaking to a people that's surrounded by people that don't believe in this God and believe in other like mythical people.
Mhm.
Mythical like gods.
Are we
And the
like
reason-
talking Egypt specifically? Like, you talking about that at the time,
we're talking about like Babylon. We're
Okay.
talking about like that kind of and Egypt, because
Okay.
Babylon and Egypt have their own gods, and in their religion, like the world was formed out of brokenness and out of chaos and out of
Mm.
like anger. And there are also stories in those religions where humans were made to be like slaves of gods.
Mm.
And so in this story that Moses is saying that's been passed down through generations, everything is countercultural. Like, so the people that first read this, they're like reading about a new religion that's saying, again, we're going to get to this eventually, that people are made in God's image, that God's making the world out of like nothing, not out of brokenness, not out of despair, but he's just making the world, he's making something out of nothing. And so even in the first, like to us, it's not hitting home as hard,
Yeah.
but to the people of Israel, like after being in Exodus, traveling for years, like not even having food, being surrounded by people that are completely like a different religion, different culture than them. This
Mhm.
is like groundbreaking story.
That's so interesting because I've heard my priest at church talk about that when it comes to like Jesus's teachings, and how like, for example, like love your enemy, even, you know, like that's like was unheard of. But it's so interesting to think like that countercultural aspect was present even in the creation story. Like I didn't think about, but you're totally right. Like it's like, oh, the mountains were formed because the gods were battling, and like, you know, we are here to serve the gods, you know, and to give, you know, but it's not specifically like that, which I guess is kind of like a nice way to like move into like, I guess like the rest of these readings, you know, like especially like as he talks about like making man and all that kind of stuff. Like that's like a nice segue, so to speak.
Yeah.
I did want to say, actually, I'm sorry, before we get too far ahead, I did want to say, because in the second verse, which I thought was interesting, that you just read, the earth was without form and void, and all these like different aspects, and I think, and even I mean, where was it? Even after that, there's a spot where it says, like he references heaven and earth almost like it's in the same place. You know, and it's interesting because I don't know, it's like I think of like, I know we're not in the Garden of Eden or anything yet, but I think of how like here's this like formless, like you said before, Natasha, like chaos, and as he creates the heaven and the earth and hasn't separated them yet, and maybe even doesn't for a little while, it's kind of just interesting to think of like how he's creating man and what his original intention was, and then man's fall eventually from that. So I just think it's interesting to kind of think of like, what did he create first? Because like I said, even though we're not getting to the Garden of Eden today, it's not the Garden of Eden anymore. So it's like what he created first, it's not exactly that, you know, but we'll get there. It's just like, I thought that was interesting that like even in the second verse, he starts talking about that.
Yeah. So crazy. So like there's so much to this. Like I feel like Genesis is so like rich. Like you read it when you're younger, or you read it for the first time and you're just like, oh cool, like that's cool. And then you like sit down and actually read it and you're like, there's so much to this. Like there's so much to the words actually on the page. There's so much to like the deeper meanings. There's so much to the Hebrew. There's so much to the context. And like, I don't know, I feel like Genesis is someplace you can like spend a lifetime actually studying.
And that goes back to like Kenneth, you were saying earlier, like you kind of think of this as like, how could it not be poetry? And like you think of this almost like cinematic. And like if you read through this, it's like God created this, and then he created this, and then he did that, and it was good, and he did this the next day, you know. And you could read through it like, great, God created all the stuff. But I think like as we look at, you know, this like next section about like all the 7 days and what God made, I think there's even though I agree, I do think it's poetry, I think the crafting of that poetry is really specific and intentful. Like where I have some notes. Oh, like even for example, I'm curious. So I do believe in evolution. I don't think, and I think it's interesting that God creates. He specifically, it says God created the, you know, all the things in the sea and then the birds on the land. So it's interesting. I'm like, oh, like from what we understand, things came from the sea, and it's very specific. He says things in the sea first and then things on land. And I think we have the agreement that if you believe in evolution, you don't think each day was a 24-hour day like we observe. And we could talk, you know, we could talk about what a day was if you guys want to. But I think it's interesting how it's very specifically said like this and then that, and then like all these things are created, and then man is created, right? So like man's created at the end of all this other stuff, and from what we understand, there was a lot of stuff here before man was here. So like it's not, if you read it as poetry, I think it's very intentful in how it's crafted, in that, you know, and we could talk, this has implications for when God breathes into the dust and the clay and all that. But like it seems like it's set up in such a specific way that yes, it's poetry and it's cinematic. And I actually think of like the opening to like Legend of Zelda when the three goddesses like drop stuff into the darkness and everything. But it's also very specific to not. It seems like it's not going against what we scientifically find is true. You know, at the same time.
I totally agree with that. There's like a saying I heard a while ago where it's that the like science is just catching up to God. Like we're so slowly like unveiling like the truth behind God's creation. And to be honest, like, I mean, that's our topic today, faith and science, but I think we're all scientifically inclined people,
Sure.
and we all find there's importance and like truth to science. Obviously, that's what science is. I'd like to think along the same lines that science is like kind of slowly unveiling what God has created, because I don't think there's anything to this day that science has unveiled that contradicts what's happening in the Bible.
Well, science is just like uncovering the processes in which things occur, right? And, like, so why wouldn't so it sounds like God created those processes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, like if God, like, you know, I hear some people will talk about when somebody dies, like God took them back, right? So why would he not do that via the means of which he created? So maybe that was a heart attack, you know, or whatever. I'm not saying like, you know, and there's an argument about like free will. So like maybe God's not giving everybody cancer. Maybe we gave ourselves cancer. Like we could sit here all day and do that. But like when people discover science, that doesn't, unless you're like trying to find ways to actually disprove God, that's a different conversation. But the existence of science is not the antithesis of God.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of problems with people's understanding of what science is and understanding of what God is. And this is really more of a philosophical kind of understanding, because science is just a word that means knowledge. It's just the knowledge of natural phenomena. And quite honestly, the Bible is not scientific. It's not scientific because it's not teaching anything about natural phenomena. It's actually completely like, what's the word? It's not concerned at all with natural phenomena. It's actually concerned with
but it also wouldn't be receptive. Like imagine if it was like on the first day, God within the water created single-celled organisms, and they lasted for X amount of years.
Yeah.
So,
like, and then who knows if that's even true?
Here.
Like, who knows if 1,000 years from now we have way more advanced sciences, and we're like, well, actually, that
but my
make
point
much
is,
sense. You know what I'm saying?
If it was a scientific breakdown of everything that would happen, like, then the point does not get across. What, like, we could talk like, what is the first chapter of Genesis trying to get across? And I think, you know, you guys hit the nail on the head before about it's introducing God, and via the creation story, it's saying like, and this God is not the God of the people around you. This is a very different entity. And like, that sounds like what it's really about.
Yeah.
It's not as much about the creation part as it is about the introducing God part.
And that's where I am, like, if the question is like, well, is science and faith, or at least in Genesis, right? Is science and the Bible, are they related? Are they compatible? I don't even think even asking that question kind of betrays a misunderstanding. It's like asking, well, is Genesis and art compatible? Like, what does that mean? Like, what are you actually saying? What are you actually asking? Right? Because, I mean, it could be just like, is Genesis 1 and music compatible? Like, it doesn't. I mean, yeah, maybe not. Like, it depends on how you use it. And then when you look at, because they're two different things. So science is concerned with the knowledge of how natural phenomena operates, whereas Genesis 1 is not concerned with that. It's concerning the origin and intent and purpose of all of natural phenomena, which is not a scientific question. It's just not what science is concerned with.
It's interesting because, like, I know people, and this is not, you know, I think that what I like about this podcast is none of us are claiming to be experts on any of this. And I think what's cool about that is, like, so I'm not saying this in a judgy way. I'm just saying this in like a recognizing the difference way. There are people who do look at this as like, the important part is the creation story. And if it says God in one day spoke all these things into existence and they just appeared, that's how it happened. And like, that's, so I guess like, rather than go up at them and say like, but we have all this evidence that it's different, I think you're right. It's more a conversation of like, it's not concerned with actually explaining to you how the things came here. It's trying to talk to you about like I can't think of the word. I guess the intent, that's it. The intent behind God. Yeah, the why.
So to be kind of fair, right? Oh, you're going to say something?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, to be kind of fair, like, we could say like, okay, basically my point is that this is concerned with the why. Science is really concerned with the how, and saying if they're compatible, I mean, I guess so, because they're not talking about the same things.
Yeah.
But a lot of people say, well, no, it is actually saying the how. the Bible is not just saying the why; it's also saying the how. God created it, and things came out, right? But if you like when you read it, I don't think it even says the how, right? Like, let's say
No.
we're being
Said he
completely
did.
fair to those who believe that but Genesis is kind of like a scientific can be used as a scientific understanding of how the world was created. But I mean, like, look at how like God creates in verse 9. It's like God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered." Oh, that's him creating the waters. I'm trying to get to like life.
Like
which
the
verse?
animals.
20.
Yeah, with the animals. Yeah, he says, "And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." And then verse 21 says, "So God created everything," right? Which is
Mhm.
not saying a how. God just says,
Mhm.
Just said he did.
he says, like,
Yeah.
let the waters have life. And the waters eventually had life. So how did he do it, right? Like, did they just instantaneously pop in? Did they
Mhm.
start to just form out of random particles in the water and then created life out of single cells? Did they, like, your
Mhm.
imagination can go wild with exactly how that happened.
Well, and that's like, I feel like science's purpose is
Yeah.
like, so in that moment, it's not, you're exactly right. He's not telling you how he did it.
Mhm.
It's not, that's not the point. But you can find out, like
Mhm.
like I say
Mhm.
this all the time when people find, and assuming the scientific discovery is true and not like, something that will be disproven eventually or like, expanded upon. So when you find this scientific discovery, it's like, God's not leaving tricks for you. He's not like trying to deceive you. God doesn't do that part, He's not
Yeah.
trying to trick you in that way. So it's like, all right, if this is here and we can firmly say this is a part of how this thing came to be, then what we're discovering is like, oh, we're discovering the tools in which he did it, which we were never told those things were.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm. Even verse
Yeah.
24, like, kind of gets to that, where God says, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures," right?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
a really
Just
good
like,
point.
He's
Yeah.
just speaking to the world that he created and says, "Yeah, bring forth life," right?
Yeah,
And
that's
yeah.
okay. Yeah,
That's
no, I'm
actually
sorry.
a great point. I actually never noticed that before, but
Yeah.
even those like 5 words could
Mhm.
like there's so much to that. Like that
Mhm.
could be a whole process in itself, but in Genesis, in this story, it's simplified to like let the earth bring forth.
But and
Mhm.
it's interesting thinking back to like the names and like the specific usage of language here and
Mhm.
there, right? Like, so it specifically says like that. In the other moments, it didn't say like let the waters bring forth. It said God
Mhm.
created the great sea creatures or whatever. Which it's
Mhm.
interesting because if our understanding,
Well,
of life is that like it started in the water,
Mhm.
so then God started it there, and then it says let the earth bring forth. So like that's the first time that he said, now the earth's going to bring it forth. I'm not directly
Mhm.
creating it. I'm doing it through this thing,
well,
Mhm.
which
even
is
even
specific.
the way it's phrased too. So, like, for example, in 24 it says, "Let the earth bring forth," but in 25 it says, "And God made," right?
Mhm.
Which I think is important to kind of understand maybe the language there. It's
Mhm.
saying what God did, which is just speak, and everything obeyed what he said.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And then the second part, which is "and so God," or "and therefore God," or "and God made," which is basically saying God wanted something to happen, it happened, so we attributed its existence to him.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And it
which
doesn't
is
matter, like,
yeah.
in Genesis, the only thing that God, like, it says that God specifically makes with his own self, like crafts, is humanity, right? Like, that's when you
Mhm.
can get into like, well, later, and I guess this is later on, right? God takes man out of the dust of the earth and forms it into a man and then breathes his breath of life into him. Like, that's
Mhm.
very, very different
Mhm.
from how he's creating literally everything else in the universe.
Yeah, it seems like the story is kind of like going through this fast forwarded pace, and then it takes this moment when humans are created. Like everything kind of just slows down. Every
Which-
moment is kind of like described in more detail.
Yeah, which is interesting because like if we're being really instead of reading it like at face value and saying like, oh, God took the dust and molded it into clay and whatever, like if we are looking at it as poetry, but poetry that was crafted very specifically,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? Like we can get into that rather than saying like, oh, like this is because like these poetic devices,
Mhm.
their usage changes, right? And like
Mhm.
that's in chapter 2. Like I know we
Mhm.
bleed into chapter 2 a little bit here, but that's in chapter 2 where it's like I know it's the same book, but it's a new like that. So for example, like if you look towards the end, where's 28? He's where he starts. Is that where he makes man?
He starts in 26.
Of chapter
Yes.
1.
Chapter
Yes.
1, yeah.
But then restates it in that slow and
Mhm.
really like, like so it's interesting in that like he does it, but it's said both ways. And in
Mhm.
chapter 1, it's done in this way of like how we've been saying, like God is creating these things and the means are like, just not specified.
Mhm.
Whereas like in chapter 2, which I know, spoiler alert, will be more next episode, when he talks about the creation of man and woman and coming from the rib and all that kind of stuff, like it's now a new poetic moment where he's not using the same poetic devices as he did in
Mhm.
chapter 1. And so we have to look at it differently. And I would even argue, like, now that we're hyper focusing on it and like, going back to Natasha, how you said like time slows down,
Mhm.
it's like that's a really cool way to just like he's now deeming importance into this matter. We
Mhm.
could dig into that
Yeah.
separately. So it's just interesting because like it specifically is listed twice,
Mhm.
in chapter 1 and then again in chapter 2. And I think that's super meaningful.
Yeah,
Which,
and I
oh, go ahead.
sorry,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. I'll ask my question
No, it's
after
okay.
because it's a little.
I mean, I was
next
just
step.
gonna say the pace of the story is actually really, really reflective, Franklin, of how like important, like what God is emphasizing tells us what to give importance to, right? Like the details aren't there of the how because the how doesn't matter. But the details of human beings coming into existence is there because of how much it matters. And like in the grand scheme of thing, we can go back and forth about like, did this actually happen? Did it not happen?
Sure.
Is it poetry? All that stuff. But maybe this was the point that Kenneth was getting to earlier. Like it matters to certain people, and I think there's space to that if you're a scientifically oriented person, and I think you're like, I want to say like you're still new to your faith. Like these are important details because like there is value to truth, and we find that in today's day and age through science. And so there's space for that. There's space for that uncomfortability of like whether or not this is true, whether or not science like merges with these parts of Genesis. But ultimately, when you grow deeper with your relationship with God, you realize that like none of that matters. Like our importance to God and God's importance to us is what ultimately matters to our faith. And I think that's exactly why that's what's more emphasized so early.
I want to rephrase. I'm sorry, before you go, Ken. Like, I just want to rephrase what you said, Natasha, a little smidge, where it's like, it's not that none of that matters. It's that none of that matters when it comes to the relationship with God, which I know, like you kind of said, but like, I think that's important because if we're thinking about intent, like how this stuff actually happened and the truth behind that, if we want to say scientifically, if we're separating in that way, matters, right?
Yes.
Those are things that we deal with. We need to have that understanding, and it helps us as a people. But in terms of like, this is an introduction to this God that we're building a relationship with, that the means have no bearing on any of that. It's just we're trying to understand his intent.
Of
exactly. Yeah. So with that in mind, I'm like, what would the incompatibility be between, so like even now, like if let's say you're a scientist, you don't believe in God or anything like that, and someone brings up Genesis to you, and you're like, well, that's nonsense because, well, what would be the point of nonsense? I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to see what would the points of contention be outside of the fact that some people who believe in Genesis believe that the earth was made pretty fast generally and in instantaneous bursts across 6 days, 6 literal like 24-hour days, which I already think is maybe a way to interpret it, but I don't think it's the only and then the necessary way to interpret it. So that aside, what other problems would a scientist really have with Genesis? I'm trying to understand what the problems could be,
I think, if I were to be like the devil's advocate, which in the terms of this podcast is really intense. No, but if I really want to be the devil's advocate there, I don't think it's as much with Genesis 1 as it is with Genesis 2, when it sounds like it's a more detailed explanation of what seems like a more fantastical, creation story. I know people always say, like, because, I know you're omitting like the 7 days thing, and I think that's fair to omit because that is the only point of contention. People are like, you really think God made the world in 7 days? It's like, I don't think the days are really, and I think that really needs to be a common understanding. I don't see anything else here that really is dissonant with science.
Yeah, to echo what Franklin's saying, I think the main point of contention here is the aspect of time, and I think that that's something that we realize later on, like that time does not apply to God the way that it applies to us. And so when you're reading it as just 7 days, then comes the whole question of evolution, which we kind of touched upon, and then there's a whole like sect of people that believe in microevolution and not macroevolution, and like we could keep going in that sense. Microevolution is kind of just like microevolution is kind of like, how bacteria kind of like will become resistant to antibiotics.
Yes.
So that's like the most like common kind of example of microevolution, because they're getting more traits or characteristics for them to survive their environment.
Is it micro because we're talking about small things, or micro because it's easily observable in a short amount of time?
It's easily observable in a short amount of time. That's a great question. Macro.
Thank you.
Macroevolution is like species breaking into different species.
Yeah, like over long periods of time and adaptations, etc. That's more like well, it's both Darwinistic, but
and even in those two like arguments, which are like macroevolution is I think the most like most source of tension when it comes to like how realistic Genesis is. It's still a concept of time that's like the issue here, like how time works.
Couldn't we argue that it's broken up into time that we understand for the sake of just us understanding?
Yes, like we can.
Well, because you could argue that like, but now I don't understand because he's saying it's days and it's not days. But I guess like it's just the idea of like this is broken up into periods and you guys understand days, so I'll call them days. Like for the sake of understanding, let's call them days.
Yeah, especially when you come with the language, right? Like one's language is limited only by one's capability for understanding. And I don't know how much I like that argument that you just made, Franklin, but
that's fair.
Because you could, I mean, like, what? I don't know.
I felt it as I said it. Like, you could turn around and go, well, then don't say days. Why are we dividing into periods?
Like, make a difference.
I think it's...
you could very well just said era, right? Or something.
I also think it's interesting, and we'll come back to this a bunch, but I feel like it's worth saying, like, if we're looking at this and going, okay, nothing in Genesis 1 really goes against or has dissonance with science, except for the days thing. That's a weird spot. It's interesting that people go, well, did the days spot? I don't understand it, so the whole thing's wrong. Like, it's interesting how, like, people will find things that we don't understand in this religion and go, well, if I can't understand it, that disproves it. And I'm like, can't understand all this.
Sorry, that kind of makes sense though, because and I think that's like why it's so different having a conversation about this with a Christian versus a non-Christian, right? And what's the key difference? Like a Christian has faith and a non-Christian doesn't.
No,
and the
fine,
leap of faith the leap of faith that we make with the uncomfortability is like the leap of faith that we make with the leap that we make with the uncomfortability of something like not making sense is faith. But people that don't have that like will rather not. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying they should just say, hey, accept that one thing that you don't get. I just feel like why can't we look at it and go, yeah, that is a question I have too. We don't know that yet.
Yeah, like why throw out the baby with the bathwater?
Yeah, and I look at it as like talking about it in days is not disproving Genesis, but it's definitely a question to be asked. And I think like we're so ready to do that in science, right? Where we look at something and we go, we don't know the answer to this yet. Let's strive to figure it out. Whereas people go, this doesn't make sense to, like, we don't give that same leeway of I have to figure this out, because there's a lot of questions that are in here, and I think having questions is fine. I think if it were full of like, blatant inconsistencies that can't be explained and things that are like so dissonant, like for example, if there is something that is explained and the process is explained so explicitly, and you know what I mean, let's say he did talk about the bacteria or whatever, and then we find out in in our observations in this world they put us in, that it's totally untrue. Like we have hard evidence of that. Now that's some big dissonance that we have to now address.
Deal with something else like that.
Yeah, but it's not
like
that level of dissonance. It's more just like, hey guys, we don't know the answer to that either. But like, let's be okay with. I feel like if you're waiting for somebody to, let's say we're talking about people who don't believe, that maybe are having a conversation. If I have to prove everything to you 100% for it to be true, then that is an unfair standard that is not on, I don't want to make it adversarial, but the other side. Like people say all the time, like I like this, where people go like, the creation of the universe scientifically requires at least one miracle, right? Like, how did the Big Bang happen? Tell me how every bit of everything was, what is it, like in a small, dense spot that could fit on the head of a pin.
And I think the how, the how thing does have a link, right? Between certain, there is a link always between the how and the why, even though they explanatorily don't necessarily have to be with each other. Like you can say like, okay, well, how was a gun created versus why a gun was created? Two completely different things, but they are also kind of in line, right? Yeah. How a gun can be created is in line with its purpose of why it was created. And why something is created is going to affect how it gets created, Sure. You're going to create it with, maybe you don't really care how lethal it is because of why you're creating it, right? Sure. Or maybe you do, So there's different things there. And I think we talked a lot about the how, and I guess my question to both of you, or even myself, is more about the why, right? Like, it seems like, and maybe we all can answer this, right? Like, all right, assuming God did make everything, make the world, how did he do it? Like, is it instantaneous? Is it over time? But more importantly, why? And if we're saying that Genesis is not really trying to be a science textbook or whatever, then why did he do any of this stuff? What is the actual theological or not even theological? What's the philosophical significance of this? If it's not trying to tell us all the details of how he did things.
Can we hold that question, because that's a deep question, and I actually think that'd be really cool to like, we can let the audience see how the sausage is made a little bit here. Like maybe when we're done with Genesis, and I know that we're gonna have like an introduction to Exodus, right? But maybe before that we have we've gone through creation, or even just after we get through creation, we can sit there and go, cool, why did God do it now that we've gone through this? And just have an episode where we like try our best to suss it out, because like, I don't know, and I think there's more reading to do before we can like even really attack that question. It's
a pretty big cliffhanger.
But I think that's a great question though. Like when we get through all of this creation story, is there any hint as to why?
I mean, it is definitely a very, very good question, because it's kind of like going back to the big question we all ask ourselves throughout life is like, what's our purpose? Yeah. Like, why are we here? What's our purpose? And there is a lot to it, I think.
Sure.
But yeah,
I don't think
definitely
want to
have that
answer.
conversation.
I think it's more like, I think it'd be really cool, like as a summary to the creation story, to go back and go like, does anyone have any clue? Does anyone have an inkling based on what we read and how we interpreted it? Like I said, we won't have an answer, but I think like just the idea of dialogue will hopefully jog some minds in the collective human consciousness, and maybe eventually someone will get there. I doubt it, but I think the pursuit is still of trying to answer that question.
That makes sense.
Still worthwhile.
We could hold off.
So then I'll rephrase my question. I won't ask. We talked about how. We're gonna save the why. So
you want who, what, where, when? Like,
no. What I'm saying is, if this is not really giving us a whole how God did things, and let's say we're holding off on the why because we need more information, what is this actually telling us?
What is Genesis 1 telling us?
I mean, there's a few parts to it, right? We're in the part where it's like the beginning of the world, but I think ultimately all parts of the Bible is pointing towards Jesus and why we need Jesus. So this is kind of setting up the why of that, right? Like we're in the like first page of the entire story of Jesus. That's how I take Genesis. And we're setting up the foundation for why Jesus' sacrifice is necessary. We're leading up to it. Does that kind of like get to what you're asking?
I'm gonna yes and you, Natasha.
Sure.
I think like also being that Jesus is God, like they're the same, although yes, a Trinity. I think the why Genesis 1 is also, like you said, it's an introduction to this God that is not the God that you're used to, not the God that you expect. And because of that, introducing you in part then to Jesus,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like that.
Does that answer? Does that? I don't know. Is that a satisfactory thought?
We don't need his approval.
I mean,
I
I'm
know,
just
but
asking the
like,
question.
Don't get me wrong. Whenever Ken
Am I
says,
satisfied? Oh, I'm never satisfied.
whenever Ken
no,
says I like
sometimes
that, I'm like,
the
ooh.
reason why is like sometimes I ask a question and I'm just like I'm digging at like a
Mhm.
core like thing that I'm struggling with, or like a question that I'm asking, and I want to make sure that like
Mhm.
you know.
I
Yeah.
think it's good. I think it's hard to. There's more, but I want to save some for the
Okay.
next episode.
Listen,
Alrighty.
that episode when we do that, I think it's going to be a real.
Mhm. Well, that episode's gonna be
Chaotic.
great. Even the next episode that we have coming up is gonna be really great because it
Yeah,
Yeah.
really make the people want more.
it
Ken.
it
That's really what
it,
you're gonna have to show up.
it moves a
You have to
little bit
listen.
towards that, right? Because we just went through the creation, but how does it end? It starts these 6 days, and the seventh day he rests. But the last thing that God creates is what? And I think that's actually extremely important.
Yeah, I
You
have
just-
a lot of thoughts for that. Very excited to talk about it.
You got me in a weird spot there, Ken. 'Cause you were like, how does it end? And my brain went to, oh, does it mean like Revelation? And it's like, I've never read Revelation, but I've like heard bits and pieces and talked to people about bits and pieces. And it seems even though everything God does is good, it does seem really scary. So it's interesting looking at this like creation story, and it is kind of beautiful and is fantastical and magical, and in a lot of those ways, like from our perspective, that intrigue us, and it brings me a lot of comfort. And then there's a part of me where I'm like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
Oh God.
I read it for the first time a few months ago, and you know when you do something terrified that like every sense of yours is like on a like the lowest frequency. Like I read it as if I could like figuratively close my eyes and get through it, because I was just like, this is scary. Like
it's so scary.
It's so scary, and I was just like, I don't want to talk about that one recently. We can just move on.
That's gonna be crazy when we get there.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
Pretty
goodness.
wild. We're gonna get there. I think it's pretty wild. I've read it like multiple times, and I have different feelings every time I read it.
Yeah.
And it's just like
Yeah.
I think there's a reason why there's a reason why time marches a little slow for the way we want things to go. Like the world could end at any moment, but there's a reason why it's not.
It's gonna wait for me to die first. It would be very
I
nice.
hope so.
Let me
Right?
finish my whole thing. And my kid. That'd be cool.
But not their kid. They can suffer a little.
I don't know. Oh,
These little
any kids
tots.
that I know.
One
Then-
question
okay.
that I like that you guys, sent out that I kind of want to hear your thoughts on is the universe too perfect to be random? Like, how do we feel about that?
Yes.
Too
Oh my God.
perfect
I
to
said
be
this.
random.
Yes, I said this to my sister recently. I think it was, I've said this to a lot of people, but I feel like if you really want to convince me that not only like the universe and then all the things bumping together to create life and the Goldilocks zone that the earth is in so that it can sustain life, and that some of that life is going to somehow become intelligent life, like all the things that I would believe scientifically that I do think are the workings of God in front of us, right? If you're going to tell me that all those things happened perfectly, but in a random thing where it couldn't have happened, but it just happened to happen, I don't know how to do that statistical analysis, but my inkling is that the possibility of it being random is such a small probability that it would not have occurred.
Yeah, I mean, in my view, all right, randomness, if something is truly random, it would be uniform, because randomness is a function of probability. So if something can happen 30% of the time, it would happen 30% of the time, all the time, everywhere, right? So it would be uniform throughout all of existence. Once you start having rules and boundaries, like even, I don't even know how you can have a mathematical or a logical rule or a boundary in reality if things were truly random. if things didn't
I'm
really
s-
have any sort of defining will or determination that controls reality. So the fact that you could even have anything that controls reality, any kind of natural law, anything that you cannot be broken, any will that is potent on reality, immediately you're dealing with the realm of something that is not random. It actually has power, potency, and agency, and controls everything. Like if it's random, um, yeah, if it was actually truly random, you couldn't have a natural law. I don't think you could. I don't even know how that would even make any sense. What is a natural law if things are truly random?
Well,
it's
natural law
it's
implies order.
Exactly.
yeah.
You know.
And
It's so interesting because I feel like in science they teach you that everything has the disposition to move towards disorder.
Mhm.
Like matter, air, like atoms, everything has a disposition to move towards disorder, but there are like powers in place that keep it in order, which is what I think is so beautiful, and how maybe it like kind of relates back to Genesis, because like there are a lot of one major theory that like when people are analyzing this that I've heard pastors preaching on is that God is making order out of disorder,
mhm,
right? Like
Mhm.
everything is like a free for all when we first read Genesis 1:1, and God is coming in and he is creating order out of the chaos. And I think it's even so interesting that the scientific world can agree with that, like
Yeah.
mhm.
that matter moves towards
yeah.
disorder, but powers are keeping it in order.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
a really good point, and I think that's like, I think you, yeah, that's a really good point, and that totally lines up with what Ken was saying about like the existence of any type of order
Mhm.
is an argument against randomness, and so that
Exactly.
if it's not randomness and there is order, where does that order come from? You know, where
Mhm.
does that
Mhm.
natural law come from? And I think that's the divine. You know,
Yeah. One of the references we had was a passage from the book of Job, Job
Mm.
38, verse 4. And I think that's so cool because that's what I mean. The story is long, but basically at some point, God answers. Job is complaining about his suffering. God answers Job, and he's like, whoa, 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 hold on. Like, I know you're suffering, whatever. But if you're going to start asking me some questions, God's like, well, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And he starts saying things like, and I'll read it. Have you commanded the morning since your days began and caused the dawn to know its place? Or things like, who determined its measurements and who told, where is this? Who gave, uh, who made the cloud its garments or shut in the sea with doors? It's all about giving order and giving rules and giving, and all God's talking about are actually just natural laws.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Like, all of these are just natural laws.
It's almost like he's representing like
And he's saying,
all of
like,
these
who's given order
workings.
to
Yeah.
basically what would otherwise be random,
Yep.
Mhm.
you know?
He's
And
saying the
that's
fact that it's not random that's me.
exactly right. And so to ask him questions on what he's doing, or it's like you don't know what you're doing. He's the one who gives order to everything. And in a sense, I would say Genesis 1 is kind of the same thing. Like in the beginning, God creates everything, but as he creates everything, everything does what it does. Everything just doesn't have any order. So God's just hovering in the darkness on the spirits of the deep, and he starts to do things. He tells the sea where to stay, right?
Mhm.
He separates the skies, the waters above from the waters below, the clouds from the sea. He starts giving rules and order and
Mhm.
purpose and direction to everything
Mm.
from both a small scale and from a huger scale. Because I think even in Job, we get a way more poetic content that you don't get, right? Like he says, "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion?" Those are constellations. So he's talking about different stars in space and stuff like that, which you don't even get in Genesis 1.
No, you do. Or
In
was
the
that in
same-
Genesis 2? That might have been in
Or maybe,
Genesis 2.
yeah.
Where he talks about like this. Oh yeah, it was. I'm sorry. We'll get to that. Then.
Hmm. So like he all these things, and I think that's a huge part of it. Of to answer your question about chaos and randomness, I think the moment you have order, it kind of betrays an order giver, right?
Mhm.
It And I think anything that can do things, that can make things happen. So I think
Mhm.
God is one thing that gives order. It
Mhm.
gives order to nature. But I think we are also responsible because we give order to ourselves. Why
Yeah.
not? And so that also brings out responsibility. But yeah.
I mean, this might get
go
back
ahead.
to that question where we're like tabling the whole "what's our purpose" question,
I
but
know.
like, but God also like makes man and is like, be good
Yes.
stewards to what I'm giving you, right?
Oh,
So
I thought you were going somewhere else.
But, I mean, but we could go there too. We could go there too. But I
Franklin's
think
like, yes.
we have.
No,
I was like,
no.
yeah, preach.
But yeah, that's
I
true.
think because we're made in God's likeness, that also means
Yes,
like we
that's
have
where I
His
was.
characteristics, which
Yes.
also include having like authority and dominionship over parts.
Yes.
No, over the
Well-
world. I was going to say parts of the world, but the world.
And that was actually going to be my next question is like, what is, image and likeness. We are made in the image and likeness of God. What the hell does that mean? Like, do we literally look like something
Ooh.
similar to what God is and all that kind of stuff?
Knocking on the doors of episode 3 at this point.
No, I know, but because it's here, I think it's important.
But it
So-
is important. I think
No.
image and likeness, I think what that is kind of said right there based off of the second part of, well, it's actually based on whatever it says in 26, right? Let us make man in our image after our likeness and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. That is the image of God, right?
So is that like, so for example, kind of how like Natasha said, I think you said that, like we give order to ourselves. And that's kind of like, we're like a microcosm of like God giving order to everything. We can give order to the world in which we can touch and manage. And that it's almost like, I remember hearing in this class I took in college, like all law that we create is law with a lowercase L, which means it's not like perfect law, but it is in relation to law with an uppercase L, right? And like all, things that are good here are lowercase g's and things that are truly good are capital G good up there. And so like we could say we could bring order with a lowercase o, whereas God brings it with the uppercase O. He brings true and perfect order. We're just trying our best to use, I don't want to say we're divine, but use the aspects of us that are in God's image and likeness to do those things, albeit imperfect, right? Which is a great usage of the word albeit, I think, a little bit there.
Yeah. There, I've heard this like discussion again. If like made in the likeness and image is speaking on our characteristics and how they're representative of God's characteristics, and then I've also heard of it like in the physical sense of like, do we look like God?
Image makes it sound like that. Likeness, I feel like is like, okay, your likeness, like that's where I feel like characteristics just on a small scale.
But image does,
yeah.
But there is like, so there's that whole thought that like no one has ever seen God the Father in his actual form. And there's also that thought that Adam and Eve saw Jesus and not God. Right? So when they're walking through the Garden of Eden, they're seeing someone in the form of human form, and that human form is Jesus, but not God, because the Bible tells us. Well, this is also again
right,
like later on.
We're getting
like
into the next episode.
We are. But then that's I think just because you brought up the image, I feel like is important to say that we're not I don't believe that we're made necessarily in the image of like God the Father. I don't think we could even comprehend what that looks like, because that's what the Bible tells us, that we can't even like look at him. But I think we're made in the image of like God the Son.
I don't think image means anything visual or physical.
I'm more towards that because I feel like Jesus was made, for example, to look like man in that way, just that he could do the job that he was put here for.
I think image is more like an idol, right? So when you're a pagan, back in the days when you guys were all pagans, right? And you made your pagan gods. What would you make it look like? You'd make it look like a goat or a cow, or not because goats and cows are what those gods look like, but those they're representations of that thing. So I don't think the image is necessarily how we look. I think the image is really our role, what we represent. I think that's what it really means. And that's why our imageness of God is tied along with our role, which is to do something that only God should really do, and is have dominion over everything.
I don't understand what you're saying. And
But that is going to be opening up in the next episode.
Yeah, we will continue the conversation. It's just the word image that throws me off, but I can table that. I can handle that.
Yeah, no, but I like this discussion, guys. I think there's like, and I hope like maybe whoever is listening can understand that like this uncomfortability is gonna exist where we're all gonna have different opinions and different interpretations, and that's okay. So. Yeah.
Well, not only is it okay, I think like so if we just came here to all agree, that's stupid. Like it's funny. I think this a little bit of context for the existence of this podcast. Like I really think it's super fun. In like for example, in Fiddler on the Roof, they talk about like all the learned man would go sit by the Great Wall and discuss the Holy Book, and literally they would kind of argue about. Well, what does this mean? No, it means this. What are you talking about? Oh, no, it means this because it says this over here. And they would study it and debate and have open dialogue. And what I love about that is everybody was just trying to suss out what's true. And because I think everybody just had the understanding, like, I don't have everything. I can't. But if we kind of work as a collective, we could inch as close as we can. So I think like the idea of like, there's going to be a lot of unanswered questions throughout this. There's going to be a lot of questions that we maybe don't come to a consensus on, but I just hope it promotes some type of thought that both for us, for anybody listening to like just dig into, because the pursuit I think is more important than finding the answer, because I think a lot of the answers are not able to be found by us.
Yeah. Completely agree. Completely agree.
But I'm also always right. So we'll come up to that in the next episode.
They're going to get to know you so well.
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
I just hope it's like a whole Reddit, Reddit of hate.
They're like, who's this guy Ken? Like,
so smug.
He knows everything.